Hi, my dear friends. Some words on Parshas Vayera in a time of great uncertainty in the world. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, undoubtedly had a transformative effect on both Avraham and Yitzchak. Because the Torah focuses more on the narrative from Avraham's perspective, we can get a better glimpse at how Avraham was transformed by looking at two very similar but very different verses that act as bookends for the Akedah story. In the narrative leading up to the Akedah, Avraham had been living in Philistine territory. After some tense remarks exchanged between Avraham and Avimelech, king of the Philistines, the two men made a peace treaty at the very site of Avraham's well on his property. Avraham called that place Be'er Sheva, which means the well of seven or the well of our treaty, since Sheva derives from the number seven, representing the 7 sheep that Avraham had presented to Avimelech, and is also the root for the word oath or treaty, Shavuah. Curiously, the story ends by telling us that Vayagar Avraham be'eretz Pelishtim yamim rabim, that Avraham dwelled in the Philistine land for many days. We note that the Hebrew word for dwelled is Vayagar, which implies a temporary dwelling, and even may imply living amidst tension and nervousness. Take a look, for example, in beginning of Parshas Balak. Furthermore, some commentaries observe that the term Yamim Rabim, that Avraham lived there for many days, implies that it was an arduous and tedious existence that seemed to go on for many days, for a very long time. Finally, despite the fact that Avraham had called his land Be'er Sheva, the verse does not say that he lived in Be'er Sheva, but rather simply says he lived in Philistine land for many days. Now that narrative acts as the precursor to the Akedah story. Immediately after the Akedah, the Torah records that Avraham came down from Mount Moriah, returned to the Ne'arav, to the young men who had been waiting for him, and they all walked together to Be'er Sheva. The story concludes by stating, Vayeshev Avraham Be'er Sheva. Avraham lived in Be'er Sheva. Now let's note the difference in this verse. Firstly, the verb no longer states Vayagar, but rather Vayeshev. And the difference being is that Vayagar, as we mentioned, is a temporary, nervous kind of dwelling, whereas Vayeshev implies a permanent living place. Secondly, it doesn't say that he lived there for Yamim Rabim, for many days, as it did previously. And finally, the place where Avraham is living is no longer called just generically Philistine land, but it's called Be'er Sheva, the name that he had given to his own home, to his own land. From all of these differences, we may conclude that Avraham must have felt more at home living in Be'er Sheva after the Akedah. One of the effects of the Akedah was that Avraham no longer felt like a stranger in someone else's land, and his life had newfound purpose, so that it was no longer a tedious day-to-day existence. What is it about the Akedah that changed Avraham's Vayagar to Vayeshev and changed the Eretz Pelishtim to Be'er Sheva? So first let me ask you, have you ever lived in a place where you feel like you don't belong, where people speak differently, act differently, think differently, where you feel out of sync with everyone else, and despite your best efforts to fit in, it's just not working? These feelings of estrangement and alienation are not unique, and we all experience them at different stages of our lives. It would seem that after the very awkward treaty that Avram entered into with Avimelech, that Avram realized just how different he was from his surrounding neighbors. Avimelech approached Avraham not out of admiration, but out of intimidation. Avimelech was nervous about Avraham. Here was a man who had almost caused his death and made his whole household ill after Avram had misrepresented Sarah as his sister instead of his wife. Avram was a man who mutilated his own infant son's body through ritual circumcision, and who sent out his firstborn son Yishmael together with his wife Hagar out into the wilderness. Avraham seemed menacing to him, this man who was driven by religious fervor to do bizarre and even seemingly cruel acts. Avraham may have been very troubled by this encounter. After all, he had spent his entire earlier life welcoming people into his tent, into his home, and making them feel like they were part of his family. But now Avram's thinking, this guy's afraid, the king is scared of me, he's afraid of me. Avraham may have wondered, how at this stage of my life will I be able to be of any positive influence upon my neighbors? They don't get me, and I feel so out of place. What else will Hashem ask of me to do that will further estrange me from the rest of humanity? This discomfiture, this uneasiness, is what caused the verse to say, Vayogar Avraham be'eretz plishtim yamim rabim. He's living day to day, but doesn't really know what the future will bring. And then the other shoe dropped, and God told Avraham to bring his son as a sacrifice. Avraham may have been thinking, this is really going to be the final nail in the coffin of any success that I might have had with my Philistine neighbors. This indeed was part of the whole nisayon, the whole trial of the Akedah. Would Avraham heed Hashem's command, even if it meant estranging humanity even further from him and his God? But after the angel stayed Avraham's hand, after it was clear that God did not expect a Jew to spill his own child's blood, Hashem reassured Avraham that mankind will indeed associate with you and learn from you. You no longer have to feel estranged from your neighbors, and they will no longer live in fear and distance from you. And this is what Hashem told Avraham after the Akedah. V'hitbarachu b'zaracha kol goyei haaretz. All nations of the world will be blessed through your children because you listen to my voice. This allowed Avraham to return to the young men who were traveling with him. He now had the peace of mind that despite the shallowness that young men may possess, they would still be able to appreciate and respect how he lived his life. He was able to return home, not to the nervous temporary dwelling on someone else's land, but to his own Be'er Sheva, a place where he could feel that he had a place, where he would no longer intimidate, but rather earn the respect of his neighbors. I'd like to conclude with a short message about what's been happening throughout the Jewish world, revolving around the United States elections. And I do so with trepidation because I know that so many people are nervous and very filled with emotion about these issues. In a lot of Jewish media leading up to the elections, there was an urgent call made to vote and to pray for Donald Trump because he was the only viable candidate for the Jewish people worldwide. I'm not here to argue the merits of his candidacy as it pertains to the Jewish world. What I do wish to express is that there is a fine line between Vayogar, this temporary dwelling, and Vayeshev, a more comfortable living and feeling at home. When we as a community behave in a way that is either intimidating or off-putting to our neighbors, we should be concerned with the fact that we are perceived as estranged from and out of sync with our surroundings. We should react to that with humility and should avoid creating further public dissonance between ourselves and the rest of the world. I'm not terribly proud of the fact that there was such a public outpouring from Jewish religious media in favor of Donald Trump, not because he didn't deserve it, but rather because it creates a stereotype of the religious Jew being politically partisan, which is unlikely to garner favor for the Jews from the rest of society, especially if it turns out that Joe Biden is the new American president. You know, during the French invasion of Russia in 1812, great Hasidic leaders were at odds as to which side to support. Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, the Kozhnitzer Maggid, and other great rabbis supported Napoleon, feeling that he would free the Jews from Tsarist anti-Semitism and oppression. But Rav Shner Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, supported Tsar Alexander I and opposed Napoleon, arguing that while Napoleon might free the Jews from their physical shackles, he'd also negatively enlighten them and free them from their religious strictures as well. There may be a lot of revisionism about what actually happened, but one thing we do know is that these political endorsements served neither side, nor the Jewish community in general particularly well. It's one thing to privately extol the virtues of one politician over another. It's another thing to come out with headlines in our media in favor of a candidate so strongly. In the end, we have to remember that the world is watching us, and our goal should be like that of Avraham, that we seek to make a Kiddush Hashem by earning the world's admiration, not their consternation. And so, my friends, Let us continue to sanctify Hashem's name wherever we are, and may Hashem watch over us and protect us all, both in Eretz Yisrael and in the diaspora. May we see a fulfillment of Hashem's promise to Avraham, that all the nations of the world will be blessed through us, and may that bring us to the ultimate redemption. May we see it. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen. And I want to reassure you that no matter who turns out to be the next president, as long as we do what we're supposed to do, and as long as we continue placing our trust in God, all will be well. Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos. Look forward to seeing you soon.